So my name is Joseph Gerson. I'm with the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. We're based in Boston, but we're national and international. And we're very lucky to be working with partners here in New York. Rosa Luxemburg and Tipton have made much of this possible. Brooklyn for Peace, Peace Action in New York State, and the International Peace Bureau. Last I knew, there were 200 and some people who had registered online. So we appreciate that we're part of something that's national and international. And I welcome us. I walked in as you did downstairs and saw the template beauty of the Scandinavian Christmas decorations, the line, and it's a kind of spirit of the times. But I think coming here, we understand the actually increasing danger of nuclear weapons, a possible nuclear war, and what that means for humanity. And we're also here at a time of major wars. Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Congo. And so I want to encourage us, even as we are in this beautiful environment, to ground ourselves in how serious the moment is for us now, and as we think to the future. I want to say a little bit about why we organized what we're doing here. The meetings at the UN and the pressure for expanding, deepening the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is obviously critically important. But I'll speak for myself here and say that one of the things that has been missing is a political discussion to understand how the world is fundamentally changing. We do not live in the world of 2010. We don't live in the world of the post-Cold War period. The world is going through profound changes, changes which are destabilizing, changes which increase the possibility of war. And we need to be looking at what really is happening, what the world we're in is, and also then how it's impacting nuclear policies and what that means in terms of what it is that we can do to prevent nuclear war, as well as to work for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And beyond preventing nuclear war, as we've been watching in Gaza, we have to just stop the killing of people, either there or here in the streets of New York with gun violence. I need to make a couple other announcements. We had hoped to have Setsuko Thurlow of ICANN and really co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. When I talked to Setsuko earlier, she had said that this would probably be the last time she'd be coming to New York, and she wanted to use the occasion to pass the torch to a younger generation. Unfortunately, in arriving in New York, she became ill, and so she can't be with us. So it's a loss for all of us. But we have filled her slot, I think, quite well with former ambassador to the UN from Mongolia, Enkhsaikhan, who I've been really privileged to know and work with. The other problem has to do with the Israel-Gaza war. We had planned to have Ahmad Kaye speaking with us. Ahmad is really from Iran. And in the deep commitment that our State Department has to make sure that people in this country and internationally can listen to people from Iran, they wouldn't give him a visa. So we have another very interesting speaker from Brazil and from Germany will be speaking in his place. So the loss for all of us. I'm sorry to be reporting that. So then just to be real quick about the format. Format is that we will have two panels. After each panel, we will have a Q&A period. Our time is tight. So when we get to Q&A, we'll ask that your comments be short and tight. My co-chairs from Brooklyn for Peace and Peace Action New York State. With me are going to be Site and well, the word for the hard ass, but I don't keep them, so we'll do that. So I think with that, yeah, with that, then I'll move to introduce our first speaker. Our speakers have 10 minutes, and we'll be tight on that. I've been really privileged now for I think it's 15 years to be working with Reiner Braun. Reiner, I guess we can modestly say, has been one of the very top leading figures of the not only the German peace movement, but also the European and international movements. He has done academic work, scholarly work around Einstein, and published a number of books. Is indefatigable. I mean, it's just really quite indefatigable. And I've also been privileged to be working with Reiner in a project on common security. And Reiner largely led that project last year, which came out with a report in association with the International Trade Union Confederation and the whole Palma Center in Sweden. And we're now working on several other major projects. So with that, I'm going to shut up and move over here. And Reiner, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues and dear friends, I was asked to speak about the first part of the topic, the urgency of disarmament. I think in this group, I have not to mention that the world is spending $2 billion per year to military purposes. And that the US is spending so much money for military purposes and wars, like the next 10 states in the world. I think I have not to tell you that every evening, 1 billion child and people are going with hunger to bed. That is the reality which asks us if we ought to continue this way, and where should the way lead to? To produce more weapons, to export more weapons, to use more weapons, even more wars. And we have 21 wars in the world and more than 200 armed conflicts, along the figures of the Heidelberg Conflict Research Institute, or simply, which count another way, the wars, we have more than 50 wars. More weapons, more military spending, that is one line. This line leads to the catastrophe. And the catastrophe is the Third World War with nuclear weapons. And we are not so far from this situation. The doomsday clock of the atomic science shows dramatically where we are, 90 seconds before midnight. This underlines the urgency of disarmament. We need disarmament for surviving as human beings. But we also need disarmament for solving the main global problems of the world. Who is speaking about the sustainable development goals anymore? Hunger, poverty, water, diversity, everything cries for development and cries for financial support. Can you imagine that we solve the climate problems without arms reduction? Reduction of military spending. From what we should spend the UN Climate Fund, 100 billion per year, and up to now, in the fund is 37 billion. The rest can immediately come from disarmament without any problem. The reduced US military budget by 60 billion is really nothing. It's like 2 military planes less, will be one of the factors for munitions or 50 tanks of reduction. So we need the money for the surviving, for the sustainable development goals, for climate change. We need the money for overcoming all the catastrophes which are in front of us. That is one urgency of disarmament. The second urgency, can you imagine that we will solve one of the global problems without cooperation between the countries in the world, without common work or a policy of common security? In the situation of confrontation, where we are going to wars, can you imagine that we will solve in cooperation one of the global problems? I can't imagine. Can you imagine that Russia, China, and the US, only to mention these three, but also India and Pakistan, will solve their global problems when they are preparing wars? That will not work. Confrontation is the opposite of solving the global problems. So we need cooperation. And the first step of cooperation is trust building. And then I'm coming to maybe the most urgent point. That is, that are new negotiations for the reduction of nuclear weapons. The nuclear weapons are the top of all these problems, because they can destroy immediately the whole planet and the life of the human beings. And this trust building for negotiations is a start point also for a process of disarmament. So I can again underline that the first negotiation should be definitely between the US and Russia. 95 or 90% of all nuclear weapons belonging to these two countries. But I think we should see the currency changes of the world power, and then we also need regional negotiations of nuclear disarmament in Europe. We have the French nuclear weapons. We have now the US nuclear weapons in Great Britain coming back. We have the British nuclear weapons. But also we need these regional negotiations in the South China Sea, including China. This is the only way how we can come to solve the global problems, and this underlines the urgency of disarmament. And when I'm speaking about the urgency, then I have also to speak about who can make it. Who are the forces which can change from confrontation to cooperation? And then I first have to speak about the huge majority of the countries of the world, of the states and the government, about all the global south, which want to have military reduction. They are a factor, and they are becoming more and more important in the international policy. The global south is the avant-garde of the governments in the fight of reducing of military spending. And we have to support them, and this is also a part of the global changes in the world power structure. But these countries will not do it alone. We need, and this is absolutely needed, we need the peace movement. And I will say it very calmly. I'm not discussing how strong is the peace movement. And we all know and want to have a stronger peace movement in every country in the world. I think you agree with me, the US peace movement is not the strongest in the world. I can tell you the German peace movement is also not the strongest in the world. But independently how strong we are, as a peace movement, we have to do everything to fight for disarmament, to put the points of disarmament on the agenda of our actions and activities. And you have to do everything, and I think you are doing it like we are doing at home, to strengthen the peace movement, the unity of the peace movement, the possibility of big actions or bigger actions of the people. Without peace movements, the change will not happen. So we have to work at home, but we have also to strengthen our international cooperation, our common work. In the campaign for disarmament, like IPB and others were doing it with the activities around GCOMS, the dates for reducing of military spending, but maybe or even more in the future. And this means we have to enlarge our cooperation. And let's dream one moment at the end of my speech. Let's dream that we come back to the event which we are organizing on the 15th of February 2003, where millions of people were marching all over the world against the war, the illegal war against Iraq. This was the biggest demonstration day in history. And why we should not repeat and organize this day again. We need the common actions for disarmament when we want to have the surviving of the human beings, when we want to develop our planet, when we want to finish hunger and poverty, and to develop a justice and peace world. Our common action is needed. Let's try to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiner. I can say that just this last Saturday, about 20,000 people marched in Berlin. So you know, their movement certainly has some strength. And I'll also just say that this morning I was on a call with U.S. and Russian arms control diplomats who are really quite scared in terms of the loss of strategic stability and are trying to find ways to restore it, to begin to put it in place. And that makes our work all the more important. Next, I want to introduce Ambassador Enkhsaikhan. Again, I've been really privileged to work with him. I met him several times, but not deep cooperation in meetings at the UN on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But we found other ways to work through IPB. And then to my amazement, I had an invitation to come to Mongolia 2 summers ago and to get a better sense really of the foundation of his work, what it is that drives him, Mongolian modern history, to say that it's not often that we have in our circles the former national security advisor of a state. A man who helped play a major role in the creation of Mongolia's single state nuclear weapons free zone, winning the recognition of that by the United States, by China, and by Russia. He is a leading figure in a coalition called GPAC, and also with the Blue Banner. And has just extraordinary connections throughout Northeast Asia and beyond. Simply to say that for many of us here in the United States, and I think we probably those from the United States are disproportionately from the East Coast, we don't pay enough attention to this country to understand what's happening in Asia, to understand the forces there, to understand the efforts for peace, to relate to those movements. And Enkhsaikhan relates to all of them, and it really helps to move us forward. So with that, I'm going to shut up, and this time you've got 10 minutes, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you, to share my views, and hear some reactions or questions if there will be any. It is difficult to intend to talk about Northeast Asia or even about the Pacific. So I guess I will just focus on one of the issues that you will find anyway, it's Mongolia's initiative that we were able to promote in the last 30 years. More than 80 meetings with the 5 nuclear weapon states and so on. That might be more interesting for you, and I think I'll be able to do that in 10 minutes. So still permission, I'll say that. So our initiative was based on our lessons learned. During the Soviet period, Mongolia was part of the Soviet bloc. And when the Soviet-Chinese relations became very tense, the Soviets have told us that in order to protect Mongolia, they would need to have their bases in Mongolia. And at that time, I think the Sino-Soviet relations were becoming very, very difficult. In 1969, they had, I think, twice border conflicts in which more than 1,000 personnel died. And that was the time when the Soviet Union was thinking of making a preemptive strike against the Chinese nuclear facilities before it becomes even stronger. So that was the time when we thought that we were part of something inevitable. So when the Soviet Union had disappeared and we regained more or less our independence, one of the first acts that we have done was to declare to the world that there were no Soviet troops, no Soviet nuclear weapons, so we are becoming a nuclear weapon country. Because at that time there were a number of nuclear weapon zones already established. But declaring is one thing, but promoting is different, because the 5 nuclear weapon states, they supported as a political declaration, but they said that they will not be able to go beyond. Why? Because they thought that then any small country would declare itself a nuclear weapon free zone and would expect from the 5 nuclear weapon states some kind of security assurances, which they said they will not be able to do. Why? Because, well, for example, the US was saying that they have many smaller countries, the members of NATO, that that might give a bad example for them to say that they will be part of the NATO, but they don't want to have nuclear weapons of their territories. And the second thing is they said that that supporting Mongolia would set a precedent for other countries as well, smaller countries that they cannot have. So it took us about 3 decades, more than 80 meetings with the ambassadors and experts in nuclear areas to convince them that it would be in their interest if Mongolia gets in such a security assurance. Because then Mongolia's territory will not be used by any Russia or China or the US against anyone else and so on. So they took us about 3 decades to do that. I'm saying that because it is one thing when governments say they support something because politically it's correct, but when it comes to the details, it is very, very difficult to move such things. So in 2000, they said that they made a joint statement saying that we will not use nuclear weapons against you or threaten to use. But our aim was not to get security assurances that they will not use nuclear weapons against us, because if you look at geography, we're between Russia and China. So it doesn't make any sense. What we want is to make sure that in the future there will none of the 5 nuclear weapon states will try to use Mongolian territory against interests of the other nuclear weapon states and so on. So we were not able to get that. So it took us about 12 more years to discuss that with them. Of course, the discussion went round and round because they have this principle of football. When they don't want to make a decision, they say, I have no problem, go and speak to the Russians. The Russians will very want to go and speak to the Chinese, because go to China and so on. So on. But nevertheless, in 2012, we were able to get security issues so that they will not use Mongolia territory. I'm saying this just to say that it set an example that a small country can also sometimes make a difference. That is a very important now, looking at the map, you will see that there are almost 2,000 countries that cannot be part of nuclear weapon free zones. Non-nuclear weapon states, but they cannot be part of the nuclear weapon free zones because of geographical location, because of political or legal reasons, and so on and so forth. There are many countries. There are some countries, let's say, in Europe, they want to become, let's say, keep their neutrality or to be between, not to take sides in, let's say, NATO, Russia, dispute. There are many countries, let's say, in South Asia. The South Asia was planning to establish a nuclear weapon free zone, but India and Pakistan have attempted nuclear weapons, and they have nuclear weapons. So what will be doing the other 8 small South Asian countries? So that's another question. And then the big question is the many small states that are in the Pacific. Now today, the US and China are working to get more influence there. And I think both sides are working very hard to take initiative and to influence the Pacific countries. But that is not good, because the Pacific countries, what they want now, not so much to be part of one or another group of states, but let's say to focus more on climate change. Make sure that their territories are not influenced by the US or by the Chinese policies, which they have in mind, the 2 great powers they have in mind to use their territories if in the right to place their even nuclear weapons like huge facilities, radars and everything and so on and so forth. Then they will be implicated there as well. So what we're trying to do is to show to the other countries that there is a possibility for smaller countries to play a positive role. Let's wait and see what the positive role. And that is, I think, is very important that what we're trying to achieve. If you look cumulatively, there are 22 countries that do not have place to go. And some of the territories is larger than, let's say, nuclear weapons free zones of Central Asia or South Pacific. Okay. So that's okay. Well, 1 more minute. So what we're trying to say is that even in nuclear weapons free zones, there are some actual fields, and these actual fields are the smaller countries that are not protected, let's say, by law, by authorities, and so on. So hopefully, our policy will give some hope for smaller countries to be active and to support and protect their own national interests. 10 minutes.
Thank you again so much, Enkhsaikhan, for jumping in and sharing that with us. Hello, I'm Emily Rubino. I'm the Executive Director at Peace Action New York State and a board member of the International Peace Bureau and oh my gosh, the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. I'm honored to be co-chairing today's session, and I'm honored to be introducing the last speaker of our first panel, Jackie Cabasso. Jackie has been Executive Director of the Western States Legal Foundation since 1984. She's been involved with nuclear disarmament, peace, and environmental advocacy at the local, national, and international levels for the past 30 years, and is a leading voice for nuclear abolition. She's also a founding mother of the Abolition 2000 Global Network to Eliminate Nuclear Weapons. And since 2007, she's been serving as the North American Coordinator for Mayors for Peace. She also serves as the National Co-Convener for United for Peace and Justice and convenes its Nuclear Disarmament and Redefining Security Working Group. So Jackie, come on up here and you've got 10 minutes.
Hello, friends. It's an honor and a challenge to be invited to speak on this panel in these extremely difficult times, and my speech is timed, so you don't need to interrupt me. Looking around today's world, we see a growing crowd of nationalist authoritarian governments and leaders, including in nuclear-armed Russia, Israel, India, China, North Korea, and increasingly the United States. In the other nuclear-armed states, Pakistan, the UK, and France, we see powerful nationalist authoritarian factions waiting in the wings. The unprecedented fog of war and propaganda surrounding the Israeli war on Hamas and the Russian war in Ukraine, the aforementioned rising authoritarian nationalisms, and the conflation of national economic interests with national security compound the challenges of understanding the complexities of relationships among nuclear-armed states. The Latin root of the word deterrence means to frighten away, fill with fear, in other words, to threaten. Deterrence undergirds entire military industrial establishments and the national security states and elites they serve. It is an ideology which has outlived its Cold War origins and is used by nuclear-armed states to justify the perpetual possession and threatened use, including first use, of nuclear weapons. In the US national security policy has been remarkably consistent in the post-World War II and post-Cold War eras. Nuclear deterrence, the threatened use of nuclear weapons, has been reaffirmed as the cornerstone of US national security policy by every president, Republican or Democrat, since 1945, when President Harry Truman, a Democrat, oversaw the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Unfortunately, Russia and other would-be superpowers have increasingly modeled their own national security policies as well as their economies on the US model. What does nuclear deterrence mean? As described in a 2008 US Department of Defense report, quote, nuclear deterrence is achieved by credibly threatening a potential adversary with the use of nuclear weapons so as to prevent that adversary from taking actions against the United States, its allies, or its vital interests. This is accomplished primarily by maintaining sufficient and effective nuclear capabilities to pose unacceptable costs and risks upon the adversary should it so act. Though our consistent goal has been to avoid actual weapons use, the nuclear deterrent is used every day by assuring friends and allies, dissuading opponents from seeking peer capabilities to the United States, deterring attacks on the United States and its allies from potential adversaries, and providing the potential to defeat adversaries if deterrence fails, end quote. In a 2021 article titled Forging 21st Century Strategic Deterrence, US Navy Admiral Charles Richard, then Chief of US Strategic Command, wrote, quote, we must acknowledge the foundational nature of our nation's strategic nuclear forces as they create the maneuver space for us to project conventional military power strategically, end quote. With Russian and Israeli leadership's veiled and not so veiled nuclear threats, Russia and Israel have both been using their nuclear deterrence in this way so far. But it's undeniable that the longer these wars go on, the greater the threats of wider regional conflicts and the potential for nuclear escalation become. Over half the world's population lives in countries whose national security postures explicitly depend on nuclear weapons and the doctrine of nuclear deterrence. In my view, nuclear deterrence is the Gordian knot blocking the path to nuclear disarmament. All of the nuclear-armed states are engaged in costly programs to qualitatively and in some cases quantitatively expand their nuclear arsenals, A new nuclear arms race is underway, compounded by offensive cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence, developing hypersonic capabilities, a return to intermediate range delivery systems, and the production of delivery systems capable of carrying either conventional or nuclear payloads, thus blurring the distinction between nuclear and conventional weapons. The speed and complexity of the interactions of all these technologies and the immense volumes of data involved increase the danger of miscalculation in a crisis amid a global context that is generating crises involving nuclear armed countries at an accelerating pace. The United States is already planning to spend up to $1.5 trillion over 30 years to overhaul its nuclear arsenal. Plans include a new class of ballistic missile submarines, a new set of silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, a new nuclear cruise missile, a modified gravity bomb, a new stealthy long-range strike bomber, and accompanying warheads for each delivery system. However, some elements in the US government don't think this is enough. Just last month, the Congressional Commission on the US Strategic Posture issued its report calling for reinforcing and building up US nuclear forces based on the alarmist view that the US could face simultaneous attacks by two peer nuclear adversaries, Russia and China. According to the Commission, it can no longer be assumed that nuclear forces necessary to deter or counter the Russian nuclear threat will be sufficient to deter or counter the Chinese nuclear threat simultaneously. Nuclear force sizing and composition must account for the possibility of combined aggression from Russia and China. The Commission recommends enhancing the US nuclear arsenal by expanding and accelerating the current modernization process, developing the capacity to produce additional nuclear warheads, developing theater-range nuclear weapons to provide increased flexibility, increasing the planned number of B-21 stealth bombers, Ohio-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines, and long-range standoff stealth nuclear cruise missiles, preparing to place multiple warheads on land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, and considering the development of road-mobile land-based missiles. The Commission also recommends development and fielding of air and missile defense capabilities that can defeat Russian and Chinese attacks. And I don't expect you to take all that in. I want you to understand the extreme density of the fog of war that is being pumped out. It's worth noting that 9 of the 12 members of the Commission have direct financial ties to military contractors or are employed at think tanks funded in part by weapons manufacturers. The recent meeting between Chinese President Xi and US President Biden in San Francisco offered a glimmer of hope that the world's two largest economies can peacefully manage their competition. But just this past Sunday, it was reported that China's military had driven the guided missile destroyer USS Hopper from China's territorial waters, claiming the vessel had entered illegally. China's state-run People's Daily quoted a spokesman for the People's Liberation Army as labeling the US action a serious violation of China's sovereignty and security. He described the United States as a, quote, security risk maker in the South China Sea and the biggest destroyer of peace and stability in the region. He said Chinese troops in the region would remain on high alert. According to the US Navy, the Hopper had asserted navigational rights in the South China Sea, consistent with international law. Adding to the friction with China, US forces last week began air and sea patrols with the Philippines. Australia, another US ally, recently sent a warship through the tense Taiwan Strait between the mainland and Taiwan, which China claims as part of its territory, despite opposition on the self-rule island. The nuclear modernization programs underway in the United States, Russia, China, France, and the UK clearly violate their disarmament obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and international law in general. But the hard truth is that neither the Non-Proliferation Treaty nor the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons can achieve disarmament for the foreseeable future because none of the nuclear armed states are willing to reimagine a global system that puts universal human security above the narrow interests of national security enforced by nuclear coercion, euphemistically called deterrence. In 1946, Woodrow Lewis Mumford wrote, quote, "You cannot talk like sane men around a peace table while the atomic bomb itself is ticking beneath it. Do not treat the atomic bomb as a weapon of offense. Do not treat it as an instrument of the police. Treat the bomb for what it is, the visible insanity of a civilization that has ceased to worship life and obey the laws of life." At the 36th annual dinner of the War Resisters League in 1959, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. declared, quote, "Today, the choice is no longer between violence and nonviolence. It's either nonviolence or non-existence." And in 1971, at the height of the Vietnam War, John Lennon gave us the vision that shows us the way forward. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie, for those wonderful words. I know we're throwing a lot of information, and 10 minutes of speaking is a lot to take in from each person. We're hoping to have written versions of the statements on the CPDCS website afterwards, so feel free to check out written versions of the statements afterwards. Before we start the second panel, we now have about 15-20 minutes to take some questions for our wonderful first panel. Margaret Engel, the Peace Action New York State Student Campaigns Coordinator, has a roaming mic. So if you have a question you'd like to ask, please raise your hand. We'll probably take a stack and then give them over to our panelists. Your first hand right over here.
Thanks very much, Bill Kitts, Member of Scottish Parliament. And I'm here just to say thank you very much indeed for being very inspiring and insightful speeches. However, there's one thing that I did want to put forward is Scotland has announced over a very long time, 60 years, that we are against nuclear weapons. All of Britain's nuclear weapons are sited in Scotland. However, the former UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who looks like a young version of Donald Trump and is about as clever. But he announced before he ceased to be the Prime Minister, and it's still going to go ahead, an increase of 40% in the UK's nuclear capacity, which totally breaches Article 6 of the NPT, which the UK signed up to. Is there some way that people think that we could challenge that legally? Please.
Great, thank you for that first question. Are there other folks who'd like to add a question to the staff?
Thanks. Diane Braun with Transcend International and Psychologists for Social Responsibility. Very thanks. So there's a lot of talk at this conference about deterrence, and our friend Rod Green said to define deterrence is a scheme to make nuclear war less likely by making it more likely. And we're talking a lot about framing the narrative and a little bit about that. And one thing that nobody really talks about, and I live in Washington, one of the think tanks, and I always raise this question, like deterrence is a theory, and it works under some conditions, and it breaks down under other conditions. And there's a very rich body of work on this from the 80s, Robert Jervis, and also like spiral theory. So I think we need to, that if you act according to deterrence theory, that I'm building up my arsenal to send you a message, you better not attack me or I'll bother you. But then you look at me and you think I'm preparing to attack you, so you better build yourself. So it flips into spiral theory. So this in terms of that, I think we should like be talking about spiral theory. And whenever I raise that, like in the think tank, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that, I remember that. But nobody thinks about it at all. Just, when you name it, then they remember. So we need to expand consciousness there.
Great, Great, maybe one more before we pass it back to the pen.
Victory Ross with the Western New York Center. And I just want to ask how we want to connect this, of course, the TPNW that we're talking about as international law. So there's a flagrant violations of international law that we see everywhere, including in all the wars that have happened since 1927, 28. How can we start to have really viable international organizations and real attention and their observation of international law?
Great, thank you, Vicki. All right, I'll pass it back to our panel. I feel like that first question and Vicki's question kind of tie together in terms of the use of international law, countries not being compliant with, treaties that they signed on to. I'm not sure who wants to take that on first. Maybe Jackie or Enkhsaikhan will want to start with that.
Always good. Okay. I mean, we could have a whole seminar on each of these questions, you realize that. The legality of the British increase in its stockpile, we'll take that one together with the international law one. The NPT is binding international law on its states parties, which include the 5 original nuclear armed states, including Great Britain. It would seem on its face that increasing the number of weapons in your stockpile would violate Article 6, which says each of the states parties undertakes to end the nuclear arms trade at an early date, that was in 1970, right? And to negotiate in good faith the elimination of its nuclear weapons. So that's yet the latest violation. However, for now 2 decades, there has been a kind of qualitative proliferation going on in terms of the modernization program initiated by the United States and the nuclear armed states. So indeed, we have a problem because international law is being degraded by each of these developments. In terms of the TPNW certainly aspires to impose international law on nuclear weapons. However, it's only binding on other states parties that have signed and ratified it. So it creates hopefully a norm or strengthens the norm, but it's not legally binding on the United States. At the same time, international humanitarian law going back to 1945 is binding on nuclear weapon states. And I personally have been arguing that nuclear weapons are illegal under international law since 1983 when I went to trial and made that as a defense. So I'll try to tie that into one of the thought, which I just did not try to put in here, which is one of the things that's really interesting to me in terms of Israel's bombing and war on Gaza is that there has been a lot of attention paid to the violation of, or at least named the violation of international humanitarian law. Now, international humanitarian law is not often a subject of public discourse, right? And here we're seeing it every single day in a lot of different ways. So my hope is that maybe one silver lining of this very dark cloud is that more people, more members of the public start to be cognizant of the notion of international law and international humanitarian law, which I believe exists as an alternative to armed conflict, right? So it's something we can talk about. In terms of deterrence and spiral theory, now let me just say one other thing about that is that the UN Security Council has to be reformed, right? Because the leading war criminals have to permanent type things. Okay. So deterrence, I mean, this is a huge subject, Diane, and what I was trying to get across was that I don't think there is one definition of deterrence. I think it's become a catch-all for using nuclear weapons to threaten in any situation that any state that has them cares to do so. And what I was trying to say was that until we confront the threat of use of nuclear weapons directly as an illegitimate, immoral, and illegal concept, then we're not getting it, we're not going anywhere. You know, and so I think what you're talking about is part of it, sure. One time we threatened, we threatened status, but it's well, but now we are in a situation where nuclear deterrence is being used in a multipolar world, in a bipolar situation in the United States and Soviet Union and Russia. So I think we need to rethink that just a little bit. And I don't want to talk anymore right now.
Enkhsaikhan, did you want to chime in on this?
Okay. Very quickly there. I think the question was about those who are trying to see what's happening in the world, see that international law is becoming weaker and weaker. In 1960s, 70s, there were a number of international conferences with the participation of smaller countries. Well, I am always going to speak on behalf of smaller countries. And those were very important and successful conferences to codify international law, for the international relations, economic relations, treaty, and then the other things. Unfortunately, there is also an unwritten rule in international relations that most of the stronger countries, they cherry pick what's in their interest, they will say it and they'll push it. If it's not in their interest, they will just ignore it. And the smaller countries will raise many issues. But lately, there has never been any international conference on focusing on specific issues. Usually, the European Union or let's say NATO or bigger countries, they agree on themselves and they say it as part of international law. International law should be important and supported by every country and ratified as law of the land as well. But that does not happen. So this is one of the things that we have in mind. But the smaller countries will always try to support international law, but nevertheless, it's the bigger countries that make the real decision among themselves. It's sharing is there. Now, with respect to nuclear weapons use, the films, I think you might see that there is an expanding section to the use of nuclear weapons. First, when the question arose, they said that they need nuclear weapons to protect themselves against those who almost have nuclear weapons. Now it's not like that. Everything is on the table. The second, they say, well, let's say the Russians are saying that they have expanded unlawfully, let's say their land, and they say this is our land, and if something happens, we are prepared to use nuclear weapons. So it's a very difficult situation, and it is, I think, expanding more and more. We still don't know what will the other four nuclear weapon states will say. They are being ignored. I don't think that we should do that. We should also agree that there is, in practice, de facto nuclear weapon states, and we'll have to try to see what we can do there without sending any prison. No such thing is done. So this is how I see it is charity when it comes to that unfortunately.
Yes, voice.
Enkhsaikhan is the ambassador, so he's very polite. First of all, I would like to say that it is great that we have international law, even on the paper, because it's the development of human beings to develop international law and have all the discussion about international law in the last 50, 60 years. So this is the progress. The opposite is the reality. But the reality has something to do with the power structure in the world. And so long we have dominant powers which can do what they want without being punished for what they have done, we will have the violation of international law. So we need another world structure, other world power structure, which makes the bigger countries weaker and the other countries stronger, and create a new kind of multipolarity which balances the interest and which forces all countries to recognize the interest of the others. So long you can dominate, you will misuse international law. When you need balanced interests and to have to balance the interests of the different countries, which I would say is the politics of common security, then you can come nearer to the realization of international law. I think this is the fight we are living in. And this has to do with the changes now. And I'm quite optimistic that with the change of the power structure in the world, with the coming to a more multipolar world, we have new chances for developing international law as a ruling law and not only on the paper. And the second is, I think Jackie was speaking was the Security Council. We need control instruments, but we need control instruments which are not working on double standards, punishing the Africans, and when the Europeans and the US do the same, they are free, they're even heroes. So that is also a question of the power structure in the world, but without control instrument, it will not work. That is like national law. National law only works because we have courts, and hopefully they are more or less independent. So that is, yeah, more or less, but that's the part of the fight. So that is my answer. It is always a question of power structure and the development of people's movement to bring the international law in the right direction. But I'm very happy that we have it on paper, and let us never give it up. We always have to say we want that it becomes reality. So this is my first answer. I'm not saying anything to the terrorists, because for me deterrence is a lie. It will never work. When we need it, it can only work on paper. When it should become reality, we are dead. Yeah, that is the reality of deterrence. So we always have to do everything to overcome deterrence. But I would like to say 2 words to Boris Johnson. He was saying one of the most bad things he had done to modernize the nuclear arsenals in Great Britain and to put it with a lot of money, which is absolutely needed for social purposes in the country. But for me, this was not the biggest crime he had done when he was Prime Minister. The biggest crime was that he destroyed the possible agreement between Russia and the Ukraine in April 22, when he was going to the Ukraine and was saying, Zelensky, fight, we will support you with everything you needed, continue fighting. He was doing it with the backup of the NATO, with the United States, but he was doing it. And this was a criminal act, and the consequences we see that hundreds of thousands of young people died since that day. We should never forget that he has done it.
Short things, very short, very short. One is just to remember, and one of the fact dynamics that's really at play in the world now is the incredible polarization of wealth. That's one of the power dynamics in every country. Well, maybe even not every, most countries, powerful countries. The other is these, I mentioned these rising authoritarian nationalist governments. And that's nationalist because nationalism is now put like almost above everything else in terms of a reason for going to war, a reason for getting conflict. So those things need to be the economics and nationalism need to be thought about also.
Thank you, Jackie, for adding that. Round of applause for our first. I wish we had more time, but we also have 4 incredible speakers for our second panel session. So I'd like to invite them up here now.
Be welcome.
Okay, thank you again to our speakers from the first panel. I think that we all now have a greater awareness of the nuclear danger that we face in this geopolitical landscape. Not an easy task ahead of us. My name is Michaela Zerkes. I'm the Executive Director of Brooklyn for Peace, and I'm also on the board of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security, which I'll be starting on our second panel. So, hoping that we can come away from today with, like I said, a greater understanding of the nuclear danger, but also encouragement and empowerment for addressing this and achieving nuclear disarmament through organizing and advocacy. And so that's what our second panel will be focusing on. So our first speaker is Molly McGinty. Molly is an Associate Program Director at the International Positions for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons, coordinating their work on the medical and humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. She also works alongside the international student representatives, medical student groups, and youth partners to raise the voices of young people in nuclear abolition. She currently serves as one of IPPNW's representatives on ICANN's International Steering Group. So Molly, take it away. You have about 7 minutes.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to time myself because I don't trust myself. Okay. Hi, it's so great to be here today with you all. I want to just start off by thanking all the organizers today for making this happen. To Emily for inviting me, and just this wonderful, beautiful space that we're going to be during an incredibly busy week. And I don't know if everybody is as tired as I am, but we're all going to bear with it together. And these rare moments where we're all in person together, taking advantage of this time and having these meetings together, I think is just so incredibly special. So, you know, when Emily first invited me to tonight's event, and with the purpose of talking about movement building, my first thought was maybe not what everybody else's would be. It was immediately about fear mongering, and how I think that fear mongering can be a good thing. Sorry. I think that with everything that we just heard in those 3 panels, coupled, or three panelists, coupled with the climate crisis, coupled with rising nationalism, coupled with increased wealth inequality, like Jackie was just explaining, I think we should all be scared. There are 2 nuclear armed states engaging in violent wars right now. There have been credible threats to use nuclear weapons in those wars. There's rising sea levels, there are fires, there are floods, etc., etc. The fear should be there, and if we're not scared, it's a cliche, we're not paying attention, right? I think the problem with fear mongering is when there's no action that can be taken. Fear mongering, you know, when we say what all those problems are, if I were to say all those things and then I walk off stage and say have a good night, that is when it's a problem. I think explaining the current reality of our situation is necessary. We're all stewards to this land, we're all citizens to this land, we all have, in some capacity, the ability to act. Obviously that changes country to country, region to region, but we all have some form of autonomy, or at least I hope so. So, movement building, what does that look like when we tell people what's going on around the world, when there are all of these coupled threats? How do we move on from there? I mean, I think, let's see, can I read my handwriting? Great, well, yes, I think it's putting the action and the autonomy in people's hands, right? So we tell people what all these problems are, people read what all these problems are, ensuring that they don't just step away and have that sense of doom and gloom here. So we're gathered here this week during the second meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which I truly think is one of the most powerful forms of international law that we have in our hands right now. I think it is a sign that the UN can work. I think it's a sign that we can work with international bodies, that we're able to work in concert with diplomats, with civil society in a meaningful and impactful way. When we're seeing all of these other forms of international law breaking down, we need to look towards what is working and try to learn from that as much as we're able to. But the TPNW is just one tool, and it's one international tool that I think sometimes feels entirely outside people's grasp. You know, when we're saying, oh, we're going to the UN to talk to diplomats, when we think that the only way that we can move forward is influencing international policy. I think that's another thing that we need to flip, so that people feel like their ability to create change is possible. So I was just thinking about a few ways that we can do this right now. You know, if we're thinking about nuclear weapons, ICANN has a whole slew of possible tools to use, like the ICANN Cities Appeal, like reaching out to individual parliamentarians, like using social media for change, which I will talk about in a little bit. And you know, this was talked about a bit in this last panel too, but the TPNW is sometimes seen as being something that doesn't have too much power because it is all about normative change. But without the normative change, the policies are not going to fall into place either. We need a culture that understands that nuclear weapons are unacceptable. We need a culture that understands that abolition is the only solution. And the TPNW brings that. So we have culture here at the bottom, and the policy change comes when the culture reaches that moment. So we need to have that groundswell of support so that the culture can shift as, or the policy can change as the culture shifts. And I think it can be as simple as just reaching out to our elected representatives. It sounds silly, but in a very, very small case study, I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We weren't signed on to the Back from the Brink resolution. I think that's ridiculous. Cambridge is known as being, you know, some utopian progressive city. It's not, but it's known as being some utopian progressive city. I sent one single email, a representative brought it to the floor, and it became unanimous vote, yes, in favor of the Back from the Brink resolution, which has nothing to do with me and everything to do with the fact that I was one single person that sent an email. So one single person can create that normative change, can build up that educational piece and move on from there. Another thing that I've been thinking of a bit this week, especially, I'm involved with Youth for TPNW, which is a global movement of young people in this space that are part of ICANN who are looking for a space in the disarmament world. And I think one thing that's missing is we tell people what the problem is, we give them the tools, but not everybody knows how to do things like format an email like that, like write a letter to the editor, like writing an op-ed, like speaking in front of people, because this is terrifying, to be honest. So I think when we're thinking about how to build up our movement, how to create that change, how to bring in a new generation of people, or even just empower people that are already involved, I think we need to go back to the grassroots and showing people how to write those kinds of letters, the best way to pitch an op-ed to a news source. I think bringing these things back down to a very, very foundational level and not being too policy wonky heavy, but telling people that we have the solutions in our hands and we can act from there. Hold on, how am I doing on time? All right, 30 seconds left. We can do this. I think just what I would like to close with is that a sustained movement needs, I think, maybe 4 key things: funding, outreach. We cannot just continue to talk to one another. As much as I love going to conferences and seeing friends and seeing colleagues and seeing people I either only met online or seeing them again in person. We need broader outreach. We need to engage a new generation of people. If you're in a meeting and you notice that everybody in the room is 40 or above, question why you were having that meeting and maybe try to invite someone new to it. And the fourth being community. And I think with community comes joy and comes an ability to continue on with this work, because it is terrifying, and no matter how much work we do, the doom will still come sometimes. But I think having that community and partnership with people is incredibly important. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm just over 7 minutes, so sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Molly.
So next we will go to Gaku Kogisuri, is an activist with Gensukyo, the Japan Council Against A and H bombs, and a leader with the Tokyo Students' Peace Seminar.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of Gensukyo. First of all, we strongly protest Russian invasion of Ukraine and Israel's attack on Gaza. There are there are in violation of international law. It is beyond the scope of self-defense. In order to prevent further civilian sacrifices, I strongly demand that all nations abide by the UN Charter and the international law, and that these conflicts are resolved peacefully. In addition, I strongly feel that the threat of nuclear weapons is growing under the global circumstances. Russian President Putin has not ruled out the possibility of using nuclear weapons and repeating nuclear threats. Also, Israeli Minister of Culture and Heritage, Enkhsaikhan, said that dropping an atomic bomb on Gaza is one option. The threat of nuclear weapon is absolutely unacceptable. I visited Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and participated in the World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs. I listened to the story of Hibakusha and learned what war and nuclear weapons have brought to their lives. One Hibakusha told us that when he saw hundreds of bodies floating in the river after the bombing, he thought, even during the wartime, this kind of killing is absolutely unacceptable. Nuclear weapons take people's lives indiscriminately and in an instant. Even those who narrowly survive have to live with a great deal of suffering, such as cancer and unexplained health problems, or being exposed to discrimination and prejudice. It is a strong wish of the Hibakusha who have experienced firsthand the inhumanity of nuclear weapons that nuclear weapons should never be used again. Unfortunately, however, there are still more than 12,000 nuclear weapons on Earth. The leader of the nuclear weapon states always advocate nuclear deterrence. They said, we are protected because we have nuclear weapons. But we are really safe, but are we really safe with so many nuclear weapons? During the Cold War, many people were exposed to atomic bombings due to massive nuclear tests. History shows that many times nuclear weapons have come close to being launched. Even if one nuclear weapon is used by any country, the damage will go beyond the borders. We are threatened by the nuclear weapons because they exist. In order for us to be free from nuclear weapons, all nuclear weapons must be eliminated from the earth. It is shameful that Japan, the only country to have experienced nuclear war, has not joined the TPNW and has not even participated in this conference as an observer, because Japan has a military alliance with the US and under the nuclear umbrella. In addition, in recent years, the Japanese government has taken the position of nuclear deterrence and has further expanded its military. Seeing this situation makes us feel gloomy. I think there is hope. The birth of the TPNW through an international citizens movement is one of them. Also, when I go out on the streets to sign petitions for nuclear abolition, many young people sign them. Many people who did not know much about the treaty signed it when I talked with them. I feel that it is very important to conduct such a steady campaign. I also think if Japan can join TPNW and convey the voice of Hibakusha to the world, it would be a big step towards the abolition of nuclear weapons. I believe that peace through military alliance or the threat of nuclear weapon is not real peace. Peace through fear is not real peace. Then I'll continue to strongly urge the Japanese government to join the TPNW and resolve further expand the voice of citizens, especially among young generations, calling for the world free from nuclear weapons. Thank you for listening.
So much, next, I'd like to invite Tom Reiner up. He is the chair of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, or CND, since 2021. He's also the director of the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. Tom studies mathematics at the University of Nottingham and became an A-level maths teacher, and he also still currently holds amongst all of those others. So.
Yeah, I'm a mathematician, and I'm not currently studying. I graduated more than 2 decades ago, so I probably have the other person on this second platform. I also failed to get a memo about the amount of time I have to speak, so I'll speak very, very quickly. So we're talking about the urgency of nuclear disarmament. So obviously I'm going to start with a piece of writing from exactly 120 years ago as my starting point, because in 1903, Bertrand Russell, reflecting on the fate of humanity as a whole, wrote the following: all the labours of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast depth of the solar system, and that the whole temple of human achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. Here, Russell is reflecting on, of all things, the second law of thermodynamics, no maths yet, but some physics, which indicates the inevitability of not just human mortality, but the eventual death of the universe as a whole. In 1903, Russell was writing before the age of widespread, intensive, mechanized warfare, before the First World War, which he vigorously opposed and was imprisoned for his opposition to it, and before the extremes of the Second World War. Sometime later, the German philosopher Gunther Anders, an admirer of Russell and his work, classified 3 epochs of human existence in his 1956 work titled The Outdatedness of Human Beings. The first epoch: all human beings are mortal. The second: all human beings are killable. The third: humankind as a whole is killable. Humankind as a whole is killable. If the second law of thermodynamics confirmed the eventual mortality of all human beings, this first epoch, and if the First and Second World Wars demonstrated that highly organized, concentrated slaughter was now possible, with the Holocaust representing the inhuman dimensions of human technological skill, then the atomic and nuclear age, made possible by leaps in understanding of physics, demonstrated an ability to kill humankind in its entirety without waiting for the long-term tendencies of the universe to run their course. Whether our rulers, because that's what we're talking about here, whether our rulers have the imagination to understand this reality or not, we know that we still live in the third of these epochs. We know that we live in the third. And here today we are faced with multiple existential risks. from impending climate catastrophe, unfolding climate catastrophe, it's a reality, pandemics, technological change, and yes, still the threat of nuclear use. And the question of how to confront and arrest these multiple risks is given less attention in the mainstream. Our work is given less attention. If we look at nuclear risk, then we can begin to see why, and we can begin to clarify some of the urgent challenges that must be addressed. Because my argument here is that we have political, not just legal, not just organisational, but linked to that direct, distinct, urgent political issues that we need to confront and correct. The question, obviously, from my point of view, of complete nuclear disarmament is an urgent one, but to get there, to avoid catastrophe that will result from nuclear use, we need to be clear-headed about the obstacles, the political roadblocks to peace and disarmament. So the TPNW, the nuclear ban, is many things to be, but politically, it represents a full frontal rejection of nuclearism from the majority nuclear, non-nuclear world. Adherence to the treaty is growing. We should celebrate this. We should hope it grows more and more. And the painstaking work that goes into getting all of those signatories, ratifications, and deposits is vitally, vitally important. Every edition, even of the smallest states, and they are incredibly important as well, as we've already heard, reinforces this rejection of nuclearism and imperils the legitimacy, the politically enforced legitimacy, so-called, of the nuclear armed states. At the same time, the nuclear armed states and those states in nuclear armed alliances are doubling down on their position. All of the nuclear armed states are rearming, modernising their warheads, missile systems, and their overall nuclear architecture. In explaining the dynamics of the emergence of the TPNW, Alexander Kement, who played an important role in this process, as we all know, described an effort to reframe the discourse on nuclear weapons by focusing on the humanitarian impact of a nuclear weapons explosion. And such a focus is a million miles away from the purely instrumental geopolitical calculations of previous treaties. It's also at odds with the outlook of the leaders of the nuclear armed states who verbally commit themselves to the idea that we can never and should never have a nuclear war, but who act distinctly differently to that indeed. That the TPNW process and its focus on the human emerged from dissatisfaction with the NPT, the cornerstone of disarmament according to the British and other governments. That is noteworthy. Alva Medal's analysis of the NPT at the time of its agreement noted a major flaw. It asked a lot more of the non-nuclear states than of the nuclear armed states. This flaw and the contradictions implied by it have worked their way to the surface over the years. We've seen how the NPT has basically failed. I'll skip a couple of pages, but you can have the whole thing on your website. Britain, and I'll go back to Boris Johnson, born in New York, you know, you should have kept him here. Britain is a good example. Britain is a good example of what is demanded politically. If we're to think about removing the political roadblocks to peace, what's claiming an independent nuclear capability, it's actually the case that Britain, not only can it not construct new railway lines, but it is completely incapable of independently sustaining a nuclear capability of any kind. It relies massively for its nuclear capability on the United States. The connections between British military and foreign policy and US military and foreign policy are intimate. And if it's a political roadblock to any sort of change in Britain, and it needs to be severed once and for all. The bombs, US nuclear bombs, are coming back to Lakenheath. That's a massive, dangerous and unprecedented escalation and expansion of the nuclear footprint. But it's just one part of the US military presence in the United Kingdom as a whole. You know, Britain says the subs and the missiles in Faz Lane are British, they're American. So from Faz Lane down to the end, the far west of Cornwall in the United Kingdom, there is an American military presence there. This is a political problem, and it is a political solution, and that means organizing. It means contesting ideas. It means demonstrations on the streets, and it means using every single opportunity to sow panic. I think this is what Gunther Anders, you know, he was asked, why are you always, you know, worrying people and sowing panic? He said, I'm a professional panic sower. I'm a professional panic, and we should all be professional panic sowers, but organize around it. Confront and remove the political roadblocks. Be courageous, because we must win this, because it's the fate of humanity as a whole that we're talking about. Thank you.
I'm sorry to cut you short, but we'll have the full version online. The last speaker of our second panel is Leonardo Bandara. He's a scholar working on WMD, non-proliferation and disarmament, mostly nuclear weapons. He's a research fellow at the Department of International Relations and Development at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and is also a member of the Institute for Development and Peace, and since 2021 is also a senior research fellow of the Middle East Treaty Organization. So although we could not have thrown any mods here today, we are so glad to be able to welcome you, Leo. So please.
So hi everyone. I'm also timing myself because I don't trust my timing skills, but yeah. So hi, I'm Leo. I'm talking on behalf of the Middle East Treaty Organization. Who here have already heard of MITO? Sure. Good. So we already started well. So usually in these kind of sections, we start with a very powerful image of an Israeli and Iranian talking together, sometimes with an Arab, sometimes with a Brit. You got the lucky to have the Brazilian here. Yeah, but we all know why. So I hope to fit our shoes. So usually I used to talk about the integrities of international political law, of humanitarian law and this kind of stuff. Today I'm going a different direction. So my aim here is to finish this very nice and very food, I really learned a lot on other speakers, but my aim here is to finish with a note of optimism. I hope to achieve that. Let me know in the end if I got it. So yes. So what is MITO? It started together with these three really nice persons, one Israeli, one Iranian, and one Brit. And their aim was to show that talk is possible, that it's possible to bring people together, and that's possible to reach those things that sometimes look unsurmountable. And when arriving here, like I coordinated my way here with Mariana, who is here, who is an Argentinian. I'm a Brazilian, so we overcome our differences there. And yeah, I was only in sports. In the Middle East is going to be the same because I have a good feeling. So how does MITO work? It's basically three main points. One is allowing people to speak. So we have to let them speak and hear what they say. That's the second point. So this is how we bridge and how we have ideas that enable us to achieve the possible. That's usually how the MITO events are called, achieving the possible. So it means that you should not focus on the problems, but on the solutions. So we have a draft treaty that's not intended to be the final version of a zone, but a way to discuss that and to show that it's possible to achieve some kind of consensus and work on some solutions that are doable in the medium and long run. So we are all here part of the TPNW second meeting of state parties. That's a huge achievement. But there are other things that are also going on. I don't know if you know that, but 2 weeks ago, there was also another meeting, and that's also in the UN at the regional level. That was the United Nations meeting on the discussions of weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. It started in 2019. The process, however, is since the 70s. The first resolution was 72. So states are talking, and creativity is needed. This is also what achieving the possible means, looking out of the box and trying to find solutions that can be welcomed and accepted by most states that are relevant to the processes. So we talked a lot here about nuclear weapon states. In this process, we are talking about one specifically that I'm not naming, but we are also talking about a region of rivalries, but also a region of possibilities. A region that was now is one of the fields I can remember that where there is a possibility of some changes. And I say that in the middle of a war that is going on. A war that because of that, we didn't have the speaker here. So one of the Iranian part could not get a visa and the Israeli could not fly. She could not leave the country. So despite of that, there is things going on. There are negotiations going on and there is an horizon. And this is one message that I would like all of you to take that. To try to look at the horizon and try to find ways of going on that. So how Mito does that? So we have side events, we bring people together, we have expert meetings, we have, that's usually where I step in. We have also what is called 1.5 track, that basically means talking to people that have the pen and they can really negotiate on behalf of an entity, usually in state, and bringing them together with people that knows the technical stuff and see where they can find ideas and solutions out of the box and out of constraints. So out of political official statements, that's mostly what we saw today in the United Nations. We are on the way. So just one note, we have here a last report for you if you want to see that's on the biological component of the zone negotiation. We also have a draft treaty that's evolving, it's already the 5th version right now. And this is also one thing about outwards thinking. And that's also one of the origins of the TPNW, thinking about weapons categories. So we have weapons of mass destruction. We're talking here about nuclear. And that's also the area where I use folks. I even have a PhD on that. But other weapons are there as well. And they provide us with some blueprints or some show of what happened. So we all know that Enkhsaikhan was originated an idea of other areas. So landmines, for example. We also have biological weapons convention. The meeting of state parties is in 2 weeks. We also have chemical weapons. So trying to connect all of that and looking about how an horizon could be not only without nuclear weapons, but also without all those categories is something that's worth thinking, and that's something that we hope to achieve as well in the Middle East and all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leo, for ending our second panel remarks on that note. We are running a little short on time because we actually have to wrap up prior to 9 so that we can clean up the space and get out of here. But I think we have time for a couple of questions. So once again, if you'd like to ask a question to our esteemed panelists, please raise your hand and Margaret will come find you with our roaming mic.
My name is Lynn Joseph from Scottish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and it's a question suggesting about meeting people where they're at, so I'm with Molly about, sometimes it is appropriate to speak about fear and maybe even this concept of panic, but actually what people care about and showing them that what they care about will be made more safe and more real by getting rid of nuclear weapons is also important, and people care about all kinds of different things. There is compassion for the hellish things that are happening, the slaughter in Gaza, but there is also care for nature. The COP28 is overlapping with our second meeting of the state parties that are in this country here, the Sierra Club, the Orgon Society. There's in my country, there are more members of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds than there are of any other charity. So it's actually very important to show that nuclear weapons testing resulted in birds with their wings burned off and fish floating in the sea and dead turtles on the beach. Not just incredible loss of human life. Actually, everything got lifted into the sky. But also it's important to think about people's love of where they are, their place, and actually nationalism is not always negative. In Scotland, we are a very strong national identity. We have a movement for Scottish independence that our peace movement has endorsed because we think of it as a way to get rid of the UK nuclear weapons from our country. And so playing to what is important to people, I think, is always part of our solution.
Any questions? Cool, all right, well, I kind of have one that I'd like the panelists to comment on. Molly is maybe the happiest fear monger I've ever met. She's very good at it, but I think that's something that we need to talk about when we're talking about abolition. Is it's not just the absence of something; it's about what we're building in its place, what we're working towards, what we have instead. And I really think that'd be a wonderful way to close out, is if each panelist could maybe share a few words about what they envision instead.
You're here. Oh, that's great.
Cool. Do we want to just maybe on speaker or whoever feels compelled to kick us off?
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, okay. I thank you so much for that comment. I think that's 100% right. I think having only one way of talking about this will never ever work. We need to go tell people about the reality of current threats and say the solution is going to alleviate things that you're facing right now. So meeting people where they're at in that kind of way. And Emily, your question was actually exactly what I wanted my response to be. I think there's so much freedom, at least for myself. I used to have a lot of climate doom, and that still lives with me in many ways, but there's so much freedom to knowing that I have at least one solution to the climate crisis in my toolbox. The elimination of nuclear weapons is a necessary step to solving the climate crisis. And I think knowing that and being confident in that and being able to share that with climate activists supports both of our work, because climate activists, as much as we do here over and over again, you can't do that. We cannot get rid of fossil fuels. The climate is already burning at a rate that we can't solve. We're going to have to change our whole entire international structure in order to solve the climate crisis. We hear the same thing about nuclear weapons. We don't have the actual ability to get rid of nuclear weapons. They're embedded in our international security regimes, yada, yada, yada. But when we're able to work in tandem with one another, and when we're able to look at what nuclear weapons do even when they're not used, the money that's diverted from climate solutions to militarism and into nuclear weapons, I think is something that's incredibly powerful to mention to people. So I think, sorry, soapbox. To answer your question, I think in the ideal world, when we're finding these solutions and when we're implementing these solutions, this piece that is saving our climate and stopping the further escalation of the climate crisis, I think is something that I find to be very life-giving and hopeful about it. So
should I?
Okay, I should, what revision, I can drop lots of nice keywords here, rules, norms, societal change, sustainable goals, like we have many things that we can talk on that. I will however go to the previous panel and with a very basic thing that was said, that deterrence is about fear. I even have an article that will go with that thing as well. I think I would envision a future where we don't need to fear, where we can try to move beyond that. And one way of going on that is also looking at the mechanisms that we have there, and those are the of construction as well. So that's a start.
Malcolm, would you like to?
Okay, sorry, I'm good at speaking, not good at speaking English, but I will comment as possible. As I speak at my speech, the nuclear deterrence is, I think, if we keeping nuclear deterrence theory all over the world, it may be used the nuclear weapons in the world in the future. And I want to live in such a world, so I think the nuclear the one way to live in peace is to avoid nuclear weapons. Okay, thank you.
Very brief. So the proud member of the both the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and the British Trust for Ornithology. I couldn't agree with it. They are great. They are great. And I think the thing that I envisage, I won't say hope, because I don't operate on hope, I operate on determination. I'm determined that we're going to abolish nuclear weapons, and I'm determined that humanity will be around to see the second law of thermodynamics rather than this natural law.
That concludes our second panel. Another round of applause for all of our. And then a huge thank you to Scandinavian House for hosting us, and to the Rosa Luxemburg Stevenson Foundation, specifically Mariana, for making this all possible technologically and logistically. I don't know if you know that this is also hybrid, so people were able to tune in online and join us, and that's all because of Mariana being very good at her job. There is a lot of wine and food left, so we can't linger too long, but if you're interested, if you drink, please take a quick glass before you go. And then I invite you to continue these discussions at another bar, at another place. We just can't stay here for too long. Luxembourg will get in trouble. So thank you again, everyone.